Apollo Justice, Ace Attorney Trilogy. I love the Ace Attorney series. Phoenix Wright, the main character from the last 3 games, feels like an everyman character, and the original trilogy felt like they were linked together not just by characters, but by the overall story. This is the new trilogy, which is more like 3 unlinked games put together, with a new attorney, Apollo Justice, being the link between them. Unfortunately, he's the least interesting character they introduce. Power has him seeing small twitches on a person to see if they're nervous or probably lying. The problem with his power is he calls it out. The person can say, "What are you talking about?" and just not agree. But they always engage with him. I guess you could say that about all the special abilities that these attorneys have. But Apollo's power seems like the one you can ignore the easiest. Now, I'm only going to show footage from the first case of each game, and I'm going to try to avoid major spoilers. But honestly, watching the gameplay at all is a spoiler. So be warned if you want to go in fresh. Also, the first cases of each of these games basically just take place in a court. The third game has us take place a little bit outside, but then it comes into a court. So most of this footage is just going to be showing the court footage. You're not going to be seeing any investigations, really. There is a character that they introduced in the second game named Athena Sykes, and she was way more interesting. And her gimmick of being able to read emotions was much more intriguing. I do think the games get progressively better. The first game in this series is not very good. It has all the gameplay issues that you saw in the previous trilogy, like never knowing what to do, never knowing if you found everything you need, and I also hated traveling around. Instead of just picking a location, you sometimes have to go to a nearby location just to go to the place you wanted to in the first place. Why not just have us pick any location? Now, to be fair, like I mentioned before, these were issues that plagued the original trilogy, but this feels like a holdover from that series, and I wish they had remade the first game with all the quality of life enhancements of the other 2 games. Now, starting with the second game, there are a lot of gameplay optimizations, with a note system to help you if you need to know where you're going or what to do. In court, if you fail too many times, they give you the option to give you a hint. Plus, there's also a story mode, and in that, the game will play itself, if you just want to enjoy reading a story. With the exception of the first game in the trilogy, this has only been available digitally in America. In fact, the second game was originally M-rated. For blood, I would guess. I didn't see any changes, but it's still a bit gruesome towards the end of that game. But I guess the ratings board reconsidered it and gave it a T rating. If you've never played an Ace Attorney game before, each case is usually set up like this. A murder happens, you investigate, then you go to court and meet up with the latest crazy prosecutor they've hired. Then you have to press the witnesses who are either lying or mistaken, and also call them out on their obvious contradictions with evidence. If the judgment doesn't happen in that day, you have to do it all over again and go back to the crime scene and try to find new clues for your investigation. As bad as I thought the first game was, it did leave me with a piece of damning evidence I ended up giving to Apollo Justice to see if he can get it cleared up. The second game has a mixture of Apollo, Phoenix, and Athena trying cases, and it was great. The cases were much better than the first game. They weren't the best, but the pace of them were improved. The third game was by far the best. They have Phoenix on vacation in another country where he has to defend people in court, and if he loses, he'll be punished the same way they are. The sense of tension is always there when you're doing cases in that country. In all the games, they give you the option to start any of the cases up at multiple points at the investigation. Or you could just go to a trial if you don't want to play the game normally. Sure, you won't have any clue what's going on, but that's a pretty normal thing for these attorneys anyway. The second and third game each have their own DLC cases, which are included, and they were both very entertaining. There's also a digital art book, as well as being able to listen to songs throughout the series if you want to. Now, here's a very nitpicky thing, but I hated how fast the setups to the locations would show up on the screen in the first game. It would go by way too fast. It was fixed back to its slow, satisfying clicks in the second and third game. Ah, that's more like it. I'm guessing people complained about this when the original game came out and they fixed it in the sequels. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who found that annoying. Apollo Justice Ace Attorney Trilogy was entertaining. Now, was it as good as the first trilogy? No. The stories were not as linked as they were back then, and it feels like they made 3 games and tried to link them together without actually thinking ahead what the story was going to be. I love the quality of life changes in the second and third game, and if it wasn't important to play so you understood Apollo's character, I would say you should just skip the first game, but you really should power through it, or at least play the trials. Now, this is normally $49.99, and this is actually a hard one. I dislike the first game in the series, but it has 3 games in here, so I say wait for it to go on a little bit of a sale. Now, this is not a bad game. It's actually funny at times, and it does feel like it borrows some gameplay elements from Danganronpa, but it's fair because that series is just an enclosed version of the Ace Attorney games. You will enjoy your time with this, but I would still wait for it to go on sale.